Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Alex Meyers. He's the COO and co-founder of TimberEye. Alex, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Awesome. Good stuff. So we were just kind of joking earlier at the start as warm up. We had never met before. So we're coming at this brand new. We're like people who don't know each other. So we're going to have this great conversation since we'll be asking and talking about all these things that you and I have never talked about in person. And often that makes the best podcast. So start us off with where we reaching you from. We just joked you're in Africa. We'll come back to that, I'm sure. But where is home base for you?
Yeah, home base for whenever I'm back in the U.S. is Portland, Oregon for now. I spent a good time last 5 years or so in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's a lot of our business is in the Southeast U.S. with Southern Yellow Pine log exporters. So geographically, it's a little bit easier to make a 2-hour drive to Savannah from Charlotte or a 3-hour drive rather than make like a full week from Portland, Oregon. But for the time being, I'm stationed here in Oregon.
For sure, for sure. Now we were joking at the start, the life as the entrepreneur, like it's all travel on 100-foot yachts with our Lamborghinis, Porsches, and all these toys. Furthest from the truth, right? Economy class, we're with the coach, the cattle in the back of the airplane, rocking it out. Nobody else, and just doing what we got to do to kind of to chase our dreams, right? So,
Yeah.
so maybe to start us off, how did you get into forestry? I think looking at your LinkedIn profile, you worked in the space for quite a while, neat background, but maybe for our listeners, introduce us to how you got started in forestry and your career path to date.
Sure. Yeah. No, I've been in the forest products industry for close to 13 or 14 years now. I'm actually fifth generation in forest products industry, so I never really had a chance to do anything else. I'd come home as a young kid and see my dad. He was a lumber wholesaler, worked for a small company that he owned. Coming home from a long day's work, pulling his hair out, and I'm like, I'm never going to do anything like this. I have nothing to do with the forest products industry. And then shortly after college, I called him up and said, "Hey, I'm kind of interested in learning a little bit more about this." And the rest was history. I jumped in and joined his company, and it's a really terrific industry with a lot of great people, and just fell in love with it from the start. So worked my way up from like sweeping sawmill floors to pulling lumber off the green chain, and getting to know the forest products industry from the ground up, and just really loved everything about it. But that was a little bit about how I got started in it. Just everyone in the family did it, and that was like it was written in the stars, I guess.
Fifth generation. Wow, that's impressive. I often joke with people, somehow, no matter what, for many of us, no matter what happens, our parents are always right. We end up trying to go a route that we don't want to do what dad or mom did. And sometimes we just end up doing exactly what it is we maybe tried to rail against in our youth. We're not doing that. I don't want to work so hard. And yet here we are in that
Yeah.
space. So out of curiosity, what does dad think about what you're doing now?
I spent a lot of time working with my dad for the majority of my career. I worked with him alongside of his wholesale forest products company. I would say he was very proud of me. Before I joined TimberEye, I was with a Commoditech startup company, and it was a big leap. I had been in forest products wholesale most of my career. We had operated a sawmill in the Pacific Northwest. We had operated log yards. We'd done a lot of partnership, like consignment business on the East Coast. So it was, wholesale lumber was really like my bread and butter, and stepping out of my comfort zone and going into technology was a big leap for me. Of course, he was really supportive of it and said, "Hey, yeah, I think this is a great opportunity, and I think you should pursue it." And so, I would say generally very supportive.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm sure he would have more praise and other words to say about his son and the direction he's going. You're in the family business, you're in the sector, so that's great. So with TimberEye, maybe for our listeners, introduce us to the genesis of TimberEye. We're 2023. If my research is right, you've been doing some R&D, getting things going. You're the co-founder. Let me. What's the origin story? Where did TimberEye come from? Was it the classic at a pub with someone you knew, or is it two strangers that walked past each other and just happened to rub shoulders? Well, what's the story?
Maybe a little bit of everything there. So my co-founder, Scott Gregg, was the one that originally started TimberEye, and he started TimberEye working with one of the largest container exporters in the Southeast at the time, back in 2020. And Scott had originally built TimberEye to try to be the best of the world at scaling a log using a mobile device. We both had actually worked for a commoditech company together prior to TimberEye, and we were doing a lot of southern yellow pine log exports, and just realized we had really terrible data to go off of. Everything was measured by hand with a tape measure. Another guy would sit next to him, write it down on a clipboard. It was kind of like, chicken scratch handwriting. They would take that to the back office. Someone not too enthused would be punching that into Excel, and then we have our bad data to go off of. And we just realized we were shipping logs for free. We were getting claims overseas due to measurement discrepancies. And just like the whole process was really, from inbound to outbound, was a complete mess. So we looked into other solutions out there. How could we manage our data a little bit better? Is there any digital log scaling software out there? And we found a couple, and I knew about a couple in the past that had approached it more of like an object detection approach, where you'd measure maybe a pile of logs, but it's like, what do you do with that data once you've measured that pile of logs? It's really difficult to move the asset from there. So back in 2020, there were some really interesting things happening with Edge Vision and the iPhone. The iPhone 12 Pro had just come out late 2020 and embedded a LiDAR device in it. And a LiDAR used to be a standalone up to $60,000 device that Apple had now embedded into $1,000 iPhones. So we're like, okay, now we can, with these two new tools that weren't available to us, a few years ago, we can actually extract the logs, point of view from its imagery and be able to accurately scale a log using the mobile device. And we took that to the Southeast US, and Scott had worked with the largest, container exporter down there. And he says, hey, this is great, but what do we do about moving the log into a container? What do I do about my row management? How do I deal with, if we say a log went to row 1 and it physically went to row 2, how do we manage that? What if a tag falls off? So there's all these different operational nuances that we never really anticipated. So, actually scaling a log, that part was great. And it's like, hey, this is actually great technology, but what do we do to move the asset through our supply chain? So beyond building the scaling device, we built an operating system with it that basically an operator will apply a QR code to the small end diameter of a log. They'll scale the log using TimberEye. And then with that QR code, we can move it to a row within the yard. We can shove it into a container and get our export documentation, like packing lists, invoices, things like that. Or if we need to transfer that asset to another customer in the supply chain, maybe it's a forester who's selling to a sawmill, that asset's now being able to not only be tracked on a log level, but be able to be managed and transferred between businesses, which is something that in the industry doesn't exist right now. So we're really like approaching TimberEye from a log level perspective rather than a pile level perspective. That's really how you get your most granular, detailed data. And then with that, you can do a lot more with it and digest really powerful analytics with when you have actual log level data. So that's a little bit about how we started. And it's like I said, we started in the Southeast US. After we had built that operating system, it went really well. We were able to get a lot of usership with log exporters. We decided to take the technology and go down to South America, and fell flat on our face. Everybody down there was doing break bulks. It was different commodities, different means of how they brought logs into their yard. And now we're dealing with vessels and, compartments and things like that, stowage plans. So we had to, we went down there, we spent months like living down there, re-engineering the software to make it fit for break bulk exporters. And then, okay, we got this nailed down. So let's go to Africa. And now that we've seen everything, we're going to go to Africa and we're just going to nail it there. Same thing. We fell flat on our face. We're like, they had all these new terms, like what's a plantation compartments, stack. They call them stacks. We call them, rows. In Europe, they call them piles. So everywhere we went, we had to adjust the software to fit these new use cases without making it too robust, where we just had everything piled into one app. We had to really be cognizant of, how do we factor this down to being able to attack as many use cases as possible but make this thing really simple for an operator to use, just be able to pick up a phone and be able to scale logs, which is ultimately, the goal of the app.
Yeah, so very very cool. Thanks for sharing that, and lots of questions are bubbling up into my mind, and the benefit is I get to ask all the really dumb questions as the host here, I guess here. Um, so what I'm hearing is the iPhone 12, and it's kind of funny. We just kind of it wasn't that long ago, right? Like I think I'm still rocking a 13 Pro Max. I know the 14, but it feels like a really long time ago. The 12, oh, that's such an old clunky thing. Before we get into some of the tech questions, I'm just curious before I lose the thought. The iPhone seemed to have the LiDAR. Android phones, not so much. What do you think? What do you think the speculate? What would you speculate would be the reason why we're not seeing that LiDAR push on the Android? Because I'm sure going to Brazil and Africa, you know, Apple's kind of the shiny thing that I'm sure you've been asked, like, hey, I got this cheap Android thing. Can I use that? And maybe it's on your number one FAQ. No, it doesn't work with that. But just before I lose a train of thought, what do you think about the whole Android thing? And is it just Apple just being more forward thinking with the technology and executing a different strategy, or do you not even hear the Android world at all? I'd be surprised if that was the case, but
We don't spend a lot of time, in the Android world, but if I had to guess, I would say Apple's a little bit more developer friendly, and having that tool created a lot of new opportunities for developers to create apps within their app store. I would say that would probably be one of the primary reasons. And that really is a challenge because in America, most people have iPhones. It's not an issue, for an operator to be carrying an iPhone. We went to, Africa, a lot of the operators had never even seen an iPhone before. So how do we address that issue? Because we don't, it's not available for like Samsung devices or any Android devices to have LiDAR. So you need to have an iPhone to use TimberEye just to scale the log. So we would, take the hassle out of that barrier of entry by bringing them the iPhone. So normally when we go into a place where iPhones aren't accessible, I mean, because you go to Africa and they're like 3-4 times the cost of what we can get them for here in America. So we'll end up bringing all the iPhones down with like suitcases full of iPhones, and we're handing out iPhones to these
you
operators.
must have been Custom's best friend doing that, right?
Yeah, no, it's part of the onboarding package, so to speak. If you go with TimberEye, then you keep these things. But I think originally when we approached these markets, that was the first thing that was one of their big barriers of entry is how do we get our hands on these iPhones? It's gonna be way too expensive to get all these in front of our operators. So we said, listen, let's take that pain point out of it. We'll bring the iPhones, and then we can really see if this is a cost benefit to the business, which has worked out really well. It's easy for us to get these devices and bring them to them, and so that's our strategy for now. I think we're going to eventually move the technology into Android devices, just mainly for the business analytics side of it, for operators that need to move logs but not necessarily scale them.
Right.
Till there's a suitable LiDAR device within an Android. Apple will be the dominant player for us until that happens. But once we kind of feel that there may be some LiDAR technologies coming out for Android, it's definitely been a big request for people. Hey, when are you going to do this for Android? And it's like, well, time will tell, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, if I could, we would. And yeah, that's often when we think about strategy, right? You see the new spatial computing is what I think Apple calls it, right? They're obviously executing a strategy that was part of it, bringing the LiDAR to bear in their AR world. But back to the TimberEye technology. So we're scaling logs. You've got some software that I'm assuming has some AI component that will scan and then take measurements of this log. Tell me more about the QR code. Is this something that's printed? Someone's got a printer on the hip, and it comes out in magic paper that never dissolves or erodes, or no insects, or can never be lit on flame. Or maybe you want to use it for other purposes in an emergency. But tell me more about that side of that mechanics. Like you're obviously solving a problem there, but is this a smooth process for the average Joe listening, going like, hey, I want to call Alex out and up and trial this? Like what's that process look like in the day to day?
Yeah, so most everything's done on our print app. So we created a print app that will actually print out these QR codes. It's a 4-inch by 3-inch standard non-adhesive tag. So we put that in like an industrial printer, like a ZT411. So a customer can order their own blank tags, have the ZT411 on site, and then they can print up to 20,000 QR codes a day on site. So that makes it really easy for them to be able to have tag inventory without ordering it, because that a couple of things that we noticed. One, with inventory delays, when operation just doesn't have tags, that can be obviously a huge problem. But then also duplicate tags. So we use a 32 character UUID to avoid any chance of that ever happening. And the print app manages all that within house. So we're able to print, millions of QR codes without any chance of any duplicates. And that's kind of gives us a little bit of peace of mind that we don't run into those data discrepancies.
And so for some of our listeners who might be going, you who, what? Like, explain to us UUID. What does that mean for the average Joe Forster?
Universal unique ID, and it's for us, it's a 32 character alpha and numeric digit. That's basically, you can print like millions of tags a day, and it would take tens of thousands of years for you to hit a duplicate. It's a character combination of just random letters and numbers that make an impossible outcome for trying to duplicate a tag. Right. And gives the log its actual unique identifier.
Unique ID, gotcha. And then so these QR codes print out, and we're just stapling them. Any special magic and stapling technology, or it's your average run of the mill?
Yeah, it depends on the operation, what kind of stapler they want to use. So like in America, they like to use the hammer stapler, and they'll put, one staple on the top left, one staple on the bottom right. It's a standard 6.2 centimeter QR code for larger, like, 10, 20 centimeter diameter logs and bigger. And we also make the QR code smaller for like mining and timber, or other like smaller building and fencing poles that you'd see in Africa. So depending on the size of the QR code, our app will adjust to know what size of QR that it's reading.
And I'm hoping it's not the norm that you have to bundle the stapler, because then you would definitely be customs' worst nightmare of, tons of iPhones. And what are these sharp, pointy things, Mr. Meyer, you're bringing on this flight?
The funny thing is, the one thing that gets us stopped the most is the QR codes. Like a roll of QR codes that looks like the most suspicious thing to them. And we'll have hammer staplers. I mean, they look, really weird going through the, the X-ray, yeah. I'm sure. But it's always the QR codes that get them. They'll pull out these QR codes and say, "What are you doing with these?" And then you got to pull out your app and show them what we do. And
or you get to use your UUID, do the explanation. Well, you see, each one has a.
I try to keep it as simple as possible for those guys, just because overcomplicating it probably gets into trouble. But that and a stack of like 10, 15 iPhones in your bag will definitely raise some questions. But
man, guaranteed you got ear tags and all these things to track the necessities you need to onboard the customers. Okay, so they go ahead and print and they scan. So I can work offline. I don't need an internet connection, or do I need some special communication satellite uplinks for TimberEye to work?
Yeah, so to get everything from the client to server side, you would need a data connection, but we developed the app to be able to function offline. Really, we discovered that when we went down to Argentina for the first time, working in remote forests with no internet, no data, not even close to data. So we really had to configure the app to be able to manage that, and really kind of put everything client side before they're able to go back to a reliable internet connection and then just upload the data. If you're working in internet in real time, then everything's syncing with the server in real time. So no matter where the business administration sits in the world, they can see what's going on between all of their yards in real time and see live updates. One of the hacks for this that we started with when we went to Brazil, where it was available, was to use Starlink devices, and they would go out to the plantations, like put jumper cables on their pickup, and then get the Starlink out, and then they'd have internet rolling. They'd be able to sync their data in real time. And then in between inbound trucks, the operators could watch Netflix and, have like a unlimited data plan where they could, at least blow off a little steam in between work trucks.
Yeah, for sure. That's incredible. So it's fascinating to hear this technology. And you've mentioned, you were in the US Southeast and you went to Latin America and then Africa. Has this been a easy adoption curve for TimberEye, or have you bumped into aside from the requirements or the use cases kind of changing by geography, but has the adoption from your customer base been pretty smooth, or has it been challenging to convince them that this is a way to go in the future, or the future is already here and you just need to embrace it?
I think one of the strong points for us, and that's a really good question. I think one thing for us, when we walk into a new business, it's very exciting for them to see what we've built. It's really cool technology for one, but also no matter where you go in the world, a lot of the problems exist in the same manner. So it's duplicate tags, it's lost revenue due to claims on the other side, measurement issues. It all kind of distills back to like very simple problems that when we go in, we're saying, hey, this is what we think that you're experiencing based on our, experience in this industry, or, the certain subsector of forest products that you're engaged in. So the initial excitement for them is there. The hardest part is the adoption of, getting an operator who's used to using a tape measure and writing it on a clipboard to use a phone. Most of the time we find that they're really excited to use this because, they're no longer sticky fingers, or like, with the sap on the tape measure, it's a lot quicker. It makes their job a lot easier. But I think, like going 0 to 1 in technology where technology really doesn't exist, I think there's always going to be barriers to entry. Everyone's really stuck in their ways. Even if it's the way is broken, it's the way they've been doing it. And that's really hard sometimes to move off of. So a lot of our strategy is, it's not just, hey, here's TimberEye, go download it and then go nuts. We'll actually fly out to wherever you're at in the world. We'll spend weeks at a time with you. We have an open channel WhatsApp group with all the operators. So anyone who's got any issues or, has any questions whatsoever, we have people stationed all over the world that can get back to you immediately and make sure that you're, having a good experience with it. Once we've crossed that and they've gotten to use it and then run in parallel with their current system and see that TimberEye is giving them better data, it's quicker, then it becomes a lot easier for them to move it through other parts of the organization and then adopt it for their primary system. So as far as new customer adoption, it's been very strong. Had relatively no churn whatsoever. I think people are seeing that it's fixing a lot of the problems that seemed unfixable before, and we're really excited to keep building on that premise alone.
Yeah, so you mentioned quicker. What is quicker mean to someone who's listening and going, Alex, I've heard this before. I've seen this, 30 years ago, someone said you can do this thing, and the Starlink thing, it's like never even heard of it, but I know it doesn't work. I'm joking, of course. But when you say quicker, what would we share with these other folks that may need a little bit more convincing?
Sure. I think it all starts with the scaling, and you could say, hey, the scaling's quicker, but really is it? So if you think about how scaling traditionally is done now, it's at least one guy with a tape measure and another person writing down the stats. Is TimberEye quicker in that case? Yes and no. A guy still has to now apply a QR code, which takes some time. That's the worst part about the job in its entirety, is the guy that has to put on the QR codes. Scaling the log becomes quicker. Instead of them finding what's the small axis, what's the long axis of this log, they just push a button and TimberEye does all that for them. So that part we find is quicker. You can have half the labor force measuring the logs. You don't need the other guy to sit there with the clipboard and write things down. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there in terms of quickness and accuracy. Where it really starts to pay off in terms of how much faster it is when we start moving the asset through the supply chain. So if I need to move a pile of logs from this row over to this row, I can digitally do that with the click of a button. If I need to audit a row and figure out how many trucks did I say went into this row actually physically made it into this row, it's a swipe of the QRs and then it's done. If I need to load a container, I stage the logs, I swipe my phone in front of the QR codes, I load it, it's gone. So we're eliminating a lot of the, counting each individual piece, reconciling that in the back office. That's really where the time's saved. And we find that really the people that enjoy this the most is, the back office and administration that say, hey, I don't have to do like all this additional data validation with pictures and counting each one that we had in there, all these other two-step processes that are now just embedded in one really easy to use app.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. I could see that, the data entry errors that can arise, and that goes away. Now, you mentioned the measurements on long and the short axis. So that's, again, accuracy and precision. I know I looked at some data in my research. What is it, 0.3 centimeters? Was I right in those measurements per se, like that tight?
Around 0.3 to 0.5, that's our tolerance level, and that's what we advertise on that.
Yeah, amazing. So when you went through this journey, I'm just curious. You mentioned people wanting to adopt, and sometimes it's a bit quicker. Any pattern you're seeing in terms of? Well, I should preface this. Something some of us are noticing is, and no disrespect to the people that have worked in the forest sector, the forest industry for multiple decades, but we're definitely seeing a shift where the younger workforce is coming into this space with built-in expectations. They grew up with Reddit, right? Versus some gray hair. Again, not disrespecting the gray hair, Michael, like Reddit, like what Reddit, like what are you guys
Yeah.
talking about? But they're coming in with a different skill set. And I'm just curious, because you're dealing with this new technology, have you noticed a pattern where there's a correlation between adoption and demographics, or where people are in their career?
I think so. I think you nailed it. The younger generation that are interested in forest products, which are not extremely robust, are finding that this new way to approach it using technology is pretty interesting. You see a lot in like carbon credits are a big one right now. Climate tech, using drones to map the environment of a plantation. The really cool things that are happening in forest products that didn't exist at all within the last maybe 5 to 10 years. You kind of attribute that to the demographic as well. I think the older generations have only known one way, and it's the way that's worked, and it's the way that it's going to continue to work for them. So even if they're having these issues with claims or bad data, I think it's just like, hey, this is the norm. This is the way that my grandfather did it and his grandfather, and this is the way I'm going to do it, and I'm going to try to get my son to do it like this. But I think the newer generation is seeing that there's a much easier way to approach the problems, and utilizing technology to fix some of these problems is necessary to move forward. So yeah, we see that a lot of the younger operators, a lot of the younger business owners are really quick to adopt this and get it right away. Some of the older generation have seen maybe some subpar technology companies or things that didn't quite work well for them try to go in and fail. Maybe they're a little bit too early in their development, or just didn't quite fix the problems they were looking to fix, and say, hey, we've tried that before. We hear that we've had a few companies come in here and try that and didn't work. And it's kind of like you have to resuscitate that account and say, hey, there's actually something brand new, and this just happened within the last couple of years, and let us show you what we have, and try to reinvigorate some of those guys that are not so easy to adopt to technology.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess when we think about developing technology, this is super cool, by the way. Was this a straight shot, or was there a lot of, because I'm sensing there's some machine computer vision, because you're using the LiDAR and measurements. I assume there's some imagery, some AI, maybe some machine learning. But to get to the point where you had your MVP, or minimal viable product, was that a straight shot journey where it was just like you and your co-founder were just in sync, just execute, or are there any entrepreneurial speed bumps or stories that you would share with the audience to say, well, we are where we are from a lot of work for sure, but there was also these things that were pivotal moments in TimberEye's career that got us to where we need to be? Because often it's like the successful idea is not the first one we come up with, it's the second one or the third one. The first one is kind of an entry door. But any fun stories or cool stories you can share about that entrepreneurial journey with you and your co-founder?
Yeah, I would say, it was roughly a straight shot, a little bit of a windy one. I mean, there's always like other things that are pulling you in multiple different directions. Hey, what if we just scrap what we're doing here and just go down this road? I think the main point for us was like, let's be the best in the world at scaling a log, and let's be the best in the world at moving it and controlling the asset. And I think the beginning stages of that where where we were first developing the technology from, hey, we were able to get a log to scale, and it's like 6 centimeters off, and like you can have the phone on for 2 minutes and it'll completely burn your hand and fry the phone and things like that. So the early stages of like, even is this possible, that was like pretty fun to go through, to the point where we scaled the first log, and it used to be where it would throw a number at you, or once you've closed it out, it would show you what's your small and long axis. We put our tape measures up. How close is it? Oh, it's 5 centimeters off. Wow, that's amazing. That's great. We're getting there. And I'll remember I was sitting in an airport leaving Savannah, Georgia, when we were first testing like this in beta, and my co-founder, his ideas are just like, he's always thinking about the next thing. He's like, what if we, you ever heard of Pokemon Go? What if we did this in augmented reality? I'm like, let's just try to figure out how to scale a log. And I think like 2 weeks later, he had this built in augmented reality. And now like when you would scale a log, it would put an augmented reality check mark on it. Or at that time, it would show you the diameter. But really the very first like months, weeks into this thing were really cool to just see, like, I can't believe this is being built. And that's attributed to Scott and how smart the guy is. he's pretty incredible on the development side to be able to put a product like this to market.
So it sounds like Scott is a technical founder then, if he's got the ninja skills to kind of put some of these Pokemon Go ideas into action and bring them to life. Yeah.
Yeah, he's our CTO and CEO. Previously worked for Boston Consulting Group. Just a really talented developer, and really between the two of us, I kind of explained like, here's my background in the industry, and the knowledge that I can bring to it, and the technical side for him. So we have like a uh, you know, really good sense of path about what really needs to be done to solve some of these issues in the industry, and have like a really like mindset about it. So it's really enjoyable to work with him.
For sure. So I'm going to kind of take it down a little path. We've talked a little TimberEye, and hopefully, if our conversation goes the right way, it'll reconnect back to TimberEye. But I'm just curious about your what you're seeing on the landscape from a technology point of view, because you made the comment around climate tech space, carbon space. There has been, maybe not as much, still quite a bit of VC money that was pumping, and that's a bit of a different beast where venture capital dollars are coming in and they have the expectation, what is it, triple double, grow at all costs, even though now maybe they've dialed that back and it's focused more on profitability. Imagine that, a business that's actually profitable versus growth and burning cash like no tomorrow. But thinking of that, do you guys get caught up in that climate tech space? Like, I don't know if you're structured like bootstrapped or whatnot, but I guess that's the first question. Are you guys caught up in that space? And if so, how does that influence how you conduct your business of forestry technology? Because that Silicon Valley tech is, I would say, very different than maybe the traditional Joe Forster or Jane Forster type of thing. So maybe I'll start with that question and just say, like, what do you see on the landscape in the technology space for forestry? Does it get you excited? And if so, what are some of these elements that you're keeping your eye on?
Yeah, and we're definitely in the venture back space. We were fortunate enough to link up some really terrific investors at Box Group and Construct Capital and Floating Point, who supported us in our early round. Yeah, I think in the VC world, and especially in forest products right now, that there are some hot buttons like carbon credits or climate tech, and as technology progresses and seeing what this technology can do for mapping an entire forest and figuring out how many cubic meters are in this forest, or what's the growth rates of these forests. These are really interesting things that technology is solving, where it used to be a guy that would cruise a forest and do averages by measuring breast height diameters of logs and timing of plantations and things like this. So I think we do get pulled in different directions in that regard. We've had carbon credit companies reach out to us to see if there's synergy between what we do and what they do. These are obviously, I think venture has woken up to the fact that there's a massive TAM here that's completely unlocked by technology, and there's a lot of hungry new entrepreneurs that want to take a bite out of that massive TAM. But for us, it's really just about, where are the problems? What can this technology fix in the short term, and where can it go, years ahead? I think the way that we focus on just being the best in the world at scaling a log, being the best in the world at moving that log, there's a lot of things that we can stem from that. So our whole purpose is really about market network effects. So we want to make sure that we're covering as much square footage in the world as humanly possible, getting people to adopt TimberEye. From there, we can build really cool tools on top of that. Without the network, you really aren't going to be successful in trying to build some end-to-end marketplace, or like a carbon credit marketplace or anything like that, without having your base network users to support any growth ideas like that. So for us, it's capture the network. There's a lot of cool things that we're doing with partner connectivity, where you have foresters that need to share relevant information, maybe their transporters or maybe their customers, or packing list or log level data, or maybe it's weight scale data or anything like that. Making export documents that are compliant with letters of credit overseas, which are a tricky one for people that sell to China and India on these really strict deadlines with really strict contracts. Just kind of focusing for us on the core problems. And I think the more that we go down the line, I'm sure that some of these other ideas that are pulling on our sleeves might come to fruition. But for us, it's just all about be laser focused right now and keep our eyes on the prize.
Yeah, absolutely. Focus, focus, focus. And for our listeners, TAM, total addressable market, way of communicating to people what the opportunity could be. What do you guys peg the TAM as for you guys today when you say it's a big opportunity?
It's a bit of a moving target to hit depending on like what subsector we're looking at. So in the world of logs, and you can base that down to, you know, pulp or saw log, is it domestic or export? You know, there's roughly like 2 billion cubic meters of logs that are processed globally annually. For us, we're attacking the log market specifically. With that, we're developing technology to be able to do this for lumber products as well. So we want to eventually be able to stem from log to sawmill to lumber output and be able to track that efficiently. So as you layer in these different, you know, subsets of forest products like lumber or, you know, components or finished products, things like that, the TAM starts to get, you know, get pretty big. You know, it's a multi-billion-dollar TAM, if not trillion, when you start talking logs and lumber in conjunction. So there's a pretty big bite to take out of this thing for the companies that approach it correctly.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm curious to know, and thanks for sharing that. I know there's, I can already picture some of the listeners that are maybe faithful followers of this podcast, and they're probably laughing right now as they listen. But they're going to ask me the question, or they're channeling, going, "All right, you got to ask, is this a subscription type of sale, or is it more usage based, where it's you know, how much volume, and we're taking a piece of that? Is it just a one time cost? Is there anything you can share for our listeners in terms of what type of model TimberEye subscribes to or follows?"
Yeah, so that was one that we spent a lot of time on and seeing how other companies were approaching this. We saw, I think the one thing about forest products, to be fair in this industry, is that it's cyclical and it runs in ebbs and flows. And one month you may be producing, you know, 100,000 cubic meters. The next you may be completely curtailed. And I think paying for software when you're not actually utilizing it is a little bit of faux pas for us. So the way we approach it is no contracts, no device fees, no annual commitments, no like tiered level of, hey, you get discounts at here, here, and here. We keep it a simple price per cubic meter. You pay for what you use. We invoice once a month for the previous month scans. We do give some volume discounts, you know, between if you're a container exporter that does 30,000 cubic meters a year versus a break bulk exporter doing a million five, or you're a plantation owner doing, you know, 5 million. So there's different pricing structures for, you know, volumatic approaches like that. But for the most part, everything's just done flat cubic meter, agree on a price that makes sense based on the volume that you're doing. And then we just leave it at that. So the goal for that would be for the user, if at any point you decide TimberEye is not the software we want to go with, it's just you can turn that off in an instant. I think that's the way to approach that fairly.
Right, and no strings attached. But you mentioned your churn is negligible, or next to zero, right? So the existing customers are obviously finding value in the solution. QR code. Can we ever get rid of it? I'm just thinking of the flow. I'm sure someone's
Yep.
probably listening, going like, "Oh man, it's
Yeah.
like just get rid of this damn thing." One, you know, like Alex doesn't have to put it on the plane and get frisk full body scan, or maybe you got to do for the viewers who can't see me, I'm doing the scan, you know, the iris scan at the airport where they
Yeah.
millimeter wave around you, right? Like, is there a future where we can ditch the QR thing?
Yeah, and it's now. We actually we support it with QR and without QR. So with LiDAR, we can actually take the log from its environment and scale it as accurately as we can with the QR code. What we lose without the QR code is traceability. So we can scale individual logs, piles of logs. We can still roughly move the assets from one to another, but for me, I'm extremely OCD and I love to see customers put a QR code so I know exactly how this log originated here. I can watch the geolocation of this log, the audit trail, figure out how it ended up in China and see every step along the way, how long it took, every bit of analytics. You lose a lot of that without the QR code. So yes, it's actually possible. It's embedded in our app to not use the QR code. We have customers that do it. You know, you might say if you're a pulp producer producing 5 million cubic meters of pulp with little sticks that big, you're not going to get on there and put little QR codes. So for use cases like that, where you're doing massive amounts of volume, a lot of the stuff's typically sold by weight. We support cases like that where you just don't need to put the QR code. It would just be way too labor intensive.
Do you think there's a way of still keeping traceability but without a QR code, or that's too Star Trekky or
Yeah, I've like, if you would have asked me a couple years ago, like what we're doing right now would have sounded too Star Trekky. So I don't think so. I think it's definitely possible. It's a question that I brought up to my co-founder quite a bit, and it's like, hey, let's get this nailed, and then we'll talk about that. But I don't know, maybe something with like identifying growth ring. I don't think the technology is quite there yet. I think we're probably, I don't know, if I had to throw a dart at it, maybe 5 years away from something that can uniquely identify the small end shape of a log against any other shape and be able to, uniquely identify it that way. I think that could be tough, but a log may look like this one day, and then you slap some mud on it, and then all traceability goes out the window. So we'll see.
that's
Hopefully,
true.
we're the first ones to nail it if it's something that can be done. But
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. Absolutely. So, when we're warming up for this podcast and just meeting and greeting, chatting, you're kind of sharing, all the travel and it's crazy. Everyone who's young is like, I want to travel, I want to do all this travel, and then for some of us who travel a lot, it's kind of like, how do I not travel? I don't want to travel anymore. Can someone else go, or do we really need to travel? And all this jazz. But I was surprised that I didn't hear Europe on the travel list, because with the and you probably can describe, I'll get you to describe it with the whole EU. There's a deforestation regulation coming in for traceability, chain of custody, and all that jazz. What does that mean to you guys? Because I assume that's another piece of the market that TimberEye could gobble up.
yeah, so and it's definitely on our radar. We found out really early with a smaller team. We decided to go extremely wide, and it was extremely hard to cover all that ground all at once. So we decided to narrow in. We went, continent by continent, and we're actually making a push into Europe starting mid-September this year. My co-founder and I will be there for 90 days, just living in Europe and visiting customers that we have prospected over there now. So we've had a lot of strong interest from Europe. We just really, for lack of time and manpower, haven't been able to make the trip. We've actually made one trip over there and spent some time in Germany and Scotland and a few other places. And with that traceability, we now have, where we didn't back then on our first visit, the ability to geolocate the origin of the log, the forester, the forest, the trucker, and have that all embedded in the log level data. So for anyone in the EU that needs traceability from the foreign country of origin, we have all of that in great detail now. So I think our product's a little bit more ready to approach that market and solve some of the problems that they're seeing over there. And that's coming up really soon. So that market and New Zealand, Australia were the two that we kind of shined away from until we kind of finished what we had on our plate and made a little extra room in the pipeline.
For sure. It's always kind of funny. You pick where you want to focus, and then inevitably everyone's pushing you in the areas you're like, no, we're good. We're going to get there, but we got to do this part. We got to win this market first. So
Exactly.
absolutely. And so thinking of bad actors, is there such a scenario, bad actors? I'm going to come up with my ninja outfit. I'm going to start pulling QR codes and staples and swapping them around. Does it really matter, or what are you seeing on the ground there?
There's it's a really good one to ask, and it really depends where you're at in the world. That definitely happens, and there's places where timber theft is prevalent, and that's one that we've been really interested in. In the United States, you don't see a lot of timber theft.